Chapter 161. Orc's Sacred Place. As Neo-Orcus town began its rejuvenation, the locals made do with a couple of small houses to live inside in the meantime. Although it was basic, it was much better than their original dwelling, which had a 50% chance of collapsing and trapping them under. Not only that, but they had access to all the food and water they could stuff themselves with. Thanks to the refrigeration in Michael's truck, the slabs of meat stored inside could be rationed for a long time without spoiling. And if need be, he could always teleport back to the nation of Reborn to pick up more food. So, everyone was energized as they helped the Rebornian engineers in creating a bigger and better place for Neo-Orcus. Bread? Anybody? Beth awakened her talent as a baker and immediately used her skills to create energizing pastries for everyone to enjoy while working. Michael was even able to teach her how to create one of the most famous bread in his previous life, the croissant. She spent the majority of her hours in the makeshift bakery the engineers made for her, and kept on creating amazingly scented goods that made everyone hungry for more. And like most people Michael awakened, the locals of Neo-Orcus found themselves looking at least 10 years younger. Their bodies no longer look emaciated, and now look a lot healthier. Despite the sounds of ongoing constructions and buildings collapsing, this led to a period of peace for the inhabitants of Neo-Orcus. Meanwhile, somewhere deep in the forests surrounding Neo-Orcus, was a wooden village made up of the Orcanine tribe. These orcs wore minimal armor, if any, and only had a loincloth that covered their private parts. Their fur, muscles, and fats were enough deterrents for any attacks that came their way. Subsequently, this became a point of pride for the orcs. Those who were able to take swords and spears only with their bare skin would be considered a lot more heroic than others and praised by all. Their wolf-like ears were decorated with rings and feathers symbolizing their feats and achievements. Performing a successful hunt, siring a child, or showing dominance against their rival tribe were examples of such. Those that had more ornaments were considered to be superior, and were treated a lot better in their village. None was more superior than their chieftain, whose fur was thicker than all, fats bulkier than most, and a tusk sharper than any knife. The leader of the orc-canine hybrid demihumans sat on his throne decorated with the furs and quills of his enemies, for his ears were already decorated with too many ornaments. "Have they surrendered?" the Orcanine chieftain asked his servants, his tone showing his tiredness. They had been fighting in an ongoing civil war with the Orcupine tribe ever since the Earth Goddess showed her wrath and sent a tremor in the lands. They, too, were deeply affected by the earthquakes since their main source of food came from the very forests destroyed by the disaster. The two tribes had a rivalry since the very beginning, but it was more of a friendly banter rather than a serious grudge. However, the destruction of the forest and the degradation of the Golden Road led to fewer resources for both tribes, eventually leading to a civil war as both tribes wanted to monopolize the remaining resources in the territory. The forest became a place too small for two tribes. They knew that if both tribes continued to live in the same territory, then they would all perish from starvation. One of them would have to be cast out from their territory. But of course, each tribe felt themselves deserving of staying in their land rather than the other. The Orcanine tribe knew they were much stronger than the cowardly Orcupine tribe, while the Orcupine tribe knew the airhead Orcanine tribe would only destroy the land rather than nurture it. Each tribe had a claim to their territory, meaning none of them would back down in this fight. "Chief, those spineless orcs refuse to give way. They have shown no intent of leaving our land," an orc reported. The Orcanine chieftain scoffed. "Typical," he said. The chieftain thought that it was quite ironic that the Occupine tribe with bodies full of spines and quills were being spineless, and refusing to look for a different land for their tribe. "Send more troops. Show them that we are the blessed ones," the chieftain ordered. Although their grudge ran deep, both orc tribes refused to settle their feud with violence. They were not savages, after all. Instead, they opted to show their dominance through worship. These orcs revered the Earth Goddess as she was the one who gave them the sustenance to survive. And to show their thanks for all the gifts that she has given them, the orcs smacked their bodies and shouted to the top of their lungs. The orcs believed that whoever worshipped the goddess more was the one who was worthy of staying in her grace. The Orcanine and the Orcupine tribes both believed they were orcs superior in worship. We shall show them that the goddess favors us. The trees say so, the chieftain said as he got up from his throne and got out of his tent. The orcs slapped their thighs in respect as soon as they saw him, which also signaled to the others that they were in the presence of the chieftain. Take me to our sacred place, the chieftain said. Orc guards guided their chieftain deeper into the forest, where their sacred worshipping place was located. As they walked into the forest, the variety of trees seemed to become more and more homogeneous, before eventually having only one type of tree in an entire area. This particular type of tree did not have thick trunks, wide leaf crowns, nor a tall stature. It was just enough for the orcs to walk up and pick up one of its fruits growing on the stems. The chieftain looked up at the nearest fruit in front of him. After a long time it had finally turned brown, ready for harvest. I thank the goddess for bestowing upon us this cacao, he said as he pulled out one of its pods from the stem. The trees that the orcs were worshipping turned out to be cacao trees. Chapter 162. Bitter Ritual. The orcs treated cacao, locally known as cacao, as something sacred and deeply connected to the earth goddess. Because of that, their territory had thousands upon thousands of cacao trees surrounding it, each one mature and ready to bear fruit all year round. The Orcanine tribe and the Orcupine tribe both worshipped these trees and protected them from any harm. It was a tradition for them to plant 10 seeds to replenish any dead trees in the area, making sure that their sacred place was still blessed by the goddess. This was started by their ancestors and was continued by each chieftain in history. It was the reason why this place was so important to the orc tribes. By leaving, they would also leave the place blessed by the goddess. Even if they found fertile ground elsewhere, it would take them years and upon years to create a forest of cacao trees ready to bear fruit. None of them were willing to leave, but if it would help the cacao trees in the long run, then both orc tribes were willing to leave. However, each chieftain thought that their counterpart wasn't capable of protecting and nurturing the cacao trees. The Orcanine tribe excelled in strength and power, especially since their species was a hybrid of orcs and wolves. However, their defensive capabilities were something left to be desired. Their aggressive nature was good in attacking others, but they were quite useless in defending the holy cacao trees from any outside attack. Meanwhile, opposite them was the Orcupine tribe, who excelled in their defense. Since they were a hybrid of orcs and porcupines, they had protective spines and quills that allowed them to essentially shoot out spears in all directions, enough to pierce through any metal armor. They were great in defense, but they had little to no attacking capabilities. Their main strategy was to hunker themselves down in one place and shoot anyone that came close. But of course, that had a weakness of its own. Without any offensive abilities, their potential enemies would be free to attack and retreat without any consequences at all. They would be able to replenish their energies, while the Orcupines would be stuck in one place, unable to rest. Eventually, they would get worn down and allow the enemies to charge through. The Orcanine and the Orcupine tribe both had their strengths and weaknesses. The problem lay in the fact that none of them had the capability to fully defend their holy ground, which was why neither was willing to back down. Why can't he understand? The Orcanine chieftain muttered to himself. Overwhelming offense is the best defense, especially with the blessing of our goddess. The chieftain cracked open one of the cacao pods with his bare hands. He searched underneath its brown hard-shell exterior and came across a collection of luscious white seeds. He took one of the seeds and observed it curiously. It was hard for him to believe that such a little seed held so much blessing from the goddess. He then put it in between his teeth and crushed it into pieces before gulping it in one go. Bitter, he commented, with his face scrunching in displeasure. Even after eating cacao beans countless times, orcs still detested the taste of bitterness in their mouth. It was a taste that they hated the most. If it weren't blessed by the goddess, then they would spit out any cacao beans they ate. Despite how they hated the taste, they still ate it regardless. They treated it as the goddess test. If they couldn't even bear the taste of one of her most precious creations in nature, then they didn't deserve to have her blessing. The chieftain closed his eyes, ready to receive the blessing of the goddess. Suddenly, a visible red aura began to manifest around the chieftain's body, empowering him with energy and pure strength. His muscles bulged, veins popping out. The fur in his body stood on end, instinctively feeling the enormous physical strength boost that the cacao bean gave him. Just one bean allowed him to almost double the size of his muscle mass, allowing him to exhibit twice the physical strength of his normal body. This was the goddess' blessing to them. Of course, there was nothing special in the cacao beans themselves. It was no different from any other seed or fruit in the natural world. However, the chemical and mana composition inside the cacao beans created some sort of reaction within the orcs that allowed them to tap into the inherent strength and power hiding inside their very bodies. This was the reason why they treated cacao trees as their sacred ground. It was what gave them the strength to protect their territories from any harm. And if the taste of cacao beans were any less bitter, they would always be eating these as a snack, allowing them to be in a permanent state of strength and power. Unfortunately, these orcs hated its bitterness so much that they only ate it during emergencies or when they truly needed it. The chieftain closed his eyes and became thankful for the goddess' blessing. He squatted, with his thighs almost parallel to the ground. He slapped his thighs simultaneously, creating a rhythmic sound that reverberated throughout the forest of cacao trees. Boo! Two! The chieftain screamed to the top of his lungs. He began to slap his body harder and harder, showing off how resilient his body became because of the transformation brought on by the cacao beans. Boo! Two! And somehow, his voice began to resonate with the sounds created by his body. Each slap was supported and reinforced by earth mana coming out of the chieftain's body, before being transmitted out to the surroundings as sound waves. As the earth mana-infused sound waves passed through the cacao trees, their branches began to sway as if they were hit with a gust of wind. The chieftain's ritual intensified, with the sound creating more and more swaying in the branches until finally, the trees themselves began to rock side to side, as if they were dancing. Chapter 163. Conflicting Orcs. This ritual was how the orcs preserved their holy grounds. It was the reason how these cacao trees remained unperturbed while earthquakes devastated the entire forest. As each cacao tree swayed on the ground, its roots untangled themselves from the ground and made the soil very loose, allowing them to become flexible as the ground shook. The orcs felt as if their purpose in life was to protect the holy grounds and give thanks to the goddess. The Orcanine tribe believed that their ritual was the best way to preserve the cacao trees from any harm. By harshly slapping their bodies and creating booming sounds that reverberated through every tree, every root, and every leaf, they were able to impart their holy grounds with their mana, thereby completing the circle of life. But of course, the Orcupine tribe thought differently. Their ritual was completely different from theirs, choosing instead to strum the quills and spines on their bodies to create a sharp and rhythmic melody that imparted vibration to the trees. The Orcanine chieftain disliked this. After all, the vibrations brought on by the Orcupine tribe's ritual were too rough on the trees, making the trees shed too many leaves. Their way was much more delicate, making the trees sway gently. But if you were to ask the Orcupine chieftain, then he would say that Orcanines were too gentle. Their way of vibrating the trees may cause some leaves to shed excessively, but it was a small price to pay to get rid of any pests that were destroying the trees from the inside. Of course, each chieftain tribe had their own opinions, which led to the civil war in the first place. To choose which one of them would get to stay and protect the holy grounds, each tribe tried to prove that their ritual was better than the other. This resulted in a standoff, with the Orcanine tribe on one side and the Orcupine tribe on the other, shouting and performing their rituals to try and overwhelm the other. It came to a point where their shouting competition became too much of a nuisance to those surrounding them, making birds fly outwards in search of somewhere quieter. This was still ongoing even now, and even the Orcanine chieftain was feeling its effects on their holy grounds. The cacao trees, which had been gently rocking back and forth to his ritual dance, suddenly stopped in place and began to vibrate. As it did so, leaves began to gently fall towards the chieftain's face, making his already angry face even more furious. There was only one person whose shouting could reach deep even through this territory. It was none other than the chieftain of the Orcupine tribe. Rata! A voice echoed. You've gotten impatient, huh, brother? The chieftain looked far into the forest, towards where the shrill noise of his rival was coming from. He had been so gentle with these trees, nurturing them from seedling to maturity, only for the cowardly Orcupine tribe to shake them vigorously without thought. Unbelievable. The Orcanine chieftain believed that these trees were sacred, and should thus be treated as such. Yet, clearly, the Acropine chieftain thought differently. It is clear that we must be the only ones to protect our sacred trees. We shall show you our worthiness. He began to channel his inner strength, the very power given to him by the cacao beans. As he slapped his muscular thighs, a visible sound wave made out of concentrated earth mana resounded out into the forest. The two sound waves clashed in the air, with the Orcanine chieftain canceling the effects of his rival and taking back control of the cacao trees in his territory. They once again swayed gently in the wind. But of course he wasn't done. The Orcupine chieftain tried to assert dominance on his territory. He wasn't going to take that lightly. It was now time for a counterattack. The Orcanine chief slapped his body even harder than before, shouting "Bu!" to transmit his ritual deep into his rival's territory. And somewhere on the other side of the forest, the Orcupine chieftain felt the cacao trees in his vicinity slowly sway in the wind, ceasing their vibration. "My brethren!" he shouted to his fellow Orcupine orcs. "Those foolish meatheads will not prevail in this war. We shall show them that our quills reign supreme." They began their counterassault, strumming the spines on their body to fight off against the barbaric booming sounds of their rivals. This led to an escalation of the war, with both orc tribes shouting harder than ever to try and outbid the other. Their rituals resounded throughout the entire forest, as well as the neighboring territories beside it, including Neo-Orcus. Michael was watching the Rebornian engineers pour concrete into the pillars that would serve as the foundation for the structures, when all of a sudden, he felt a disturbance in the air. He looked around and saw two different earth mana signatures coming from the forest, clashing against each other and creating a furious storm of mana that was heading in their very direction. Since these were merely sound waves imbued with a little bit of mana, it wasn't dangerous or anything, but it was quite loud. The locals of Neo-Orcus suddenly heard a high-pitched and a low-pitched sound grating on their ears. They covered their ears quickly and ducked down. This was not the first time that they heard this annoying sound that came from the forest. Although harmless, the sound would usually last a day or more, making their lives extremely miserable after hearing nothing but that screech in their ears. Beth covered the ears of one of the kids right next to her, choosing instead to help him instead of herself. She was going to endure the sound, but then, silence. She looked around and saw a prismatic bubble wrapped around her body, completely muting her ears from the outside world. Beth wasn't the only one. Everyone around her was protected by this all-encompassing shield. This was none other than their inherent skill lesser unity defense they gained after Michael awakened their talent. "What's that sound?" Michael asked as he approached Beth. Chapter 164, Trying to Meet with Orcs. "That's the orcs," she said gravely. Yuna and her ogre battle made Agnes both approached Michael. "I've heard the orcs shout send reverberation to an entire battlefield. I realize now how loud it is." Even though Yuna and Agnes had no prismatic shield to protect them, they didn't seem to be too much affected by the deafening echoes of concentrated earth mana. Instead, Michael could see a concentration of fire mana gathering at the ears, essentially neutralizing the earth mana from the sound waves. What fascinated Michael was the fact that they didn't cast any spell to do that. It was a natural reaction from their bodies, the way a muscle tenses when hit by something hard. "I guess that's one of the perks of training your body for physical arts," Michael thought to himself. After being distracted a little bit, Michael shook his head and concentrated on the problem at hand. "Have the orcs always been like this?" he asked Beth. She nodded, remembering the sleepless nights they endured while the sounds of the orcs' shouts echoed through the forest. That was one of the reasons why most of the inhabitants of the old Orcus town left to settle in a different area. They couldn't stand the noise. "Why?" Michael asked, which Beth had no answer for. They never bothered to find out because it would do them no good at all. They had no power to change things. Thankfully, Yuna held a lot of knowledge about orcs brought about by her training as a diplomat. "I've heard that the orcs tend to turn on each other in harsh times. The two different clashing shouts are evidence of that. My guess is that the two orcs are battling it out for possession of the last resources in the forest, she explained. Michael looked to the horizon, towards the orc territory. They were affected by the earthquake too, he muttered. Yuna nodded. Yes, but the degradation of the Golden Road was what truly led the orcs to fall in hard times. According to the history books I read, these orcs used to find employment in the Golden Road as bodyguards for hire. They protected merchants and envoys in their journey, scaring off any unwanted troubles. That was how they earned enough money to buy food and resources to keep their hunger in check. And you know orcs, they need a lot of sustenance to survive, mostly meat. And with the loss of the Golden Road, the orcs lost their source of income. My guess is that they then resorted to hunting in the forest for food. But with the earthquakes destroying and disturbing the ecosystem, they must have had trouble feeding both tribes. Michael appreciated Yuna's insight into the whole situation. We can certainly help them, Michael said. Is there any way that I can meet with the orcs? You want to recruit them? Yuna guessed. Yup. With our help, they don't need to fight it out with each other any longer. They could become part of the nation of Reborn and have all the food they could ever want. We still have a lot of meat in the fridge ready to give out. Neo Orcus wouldn't be the paradise he was hoping for if there were suffering orcs just beside them. Not only that, but with their previous jobs as bodyguards and escorts, Michael felt that the orcs could serve as good protectors of Neo Orcus. Although he was planning on sending a few Rebornian security centaurs here in the future, it would be good if they had their own security to begin with. There is a way to meet with them, and that is through meat, literally, Yuna said. I remember about that too, Beth interjected. She could recall hearing about this method when she was younger, when she was surrounded by merchants and peddlers. It's through giving the orcs a slab of meat with a flag staked through it, right? That's right, Yuna nodded. Orcs are quite intimidating, so people would ask for the services of the orcs by gifting them a piece of meat with a flag on it. The orcs would know to return to that place tomorrow morning to meet with their potential employer. Michael nodded, already planning in his mind. Thanks for telling me, he said to Yuna. Without you, I would have had to rely on Fudge's investigative skills. And you know Fudge. His opinion could be quite skewed to fit his ninja view of the world, he joked. The adorable but edgy slime popped out of Michael's shadow in protest. Master, I always give you an unbiased opinion. Really? Why didn't you tell me that you met Yuna? Michael asked, staring at the guilty Fudge. That's beside the point. Michael continued staring at the slime until finally, Miss Yuna. Master is bullying me. The supposed nonchalant ninja slime hopped on over to Yuna's arms like a kid crying to his mom after being made fun of in the playground. There. Don't mind him, Yuna said as she patted Fudge, consoling the cute little slime. You're doing a great job as a ninja. The little bratty slime quickly showed a warm smile at Yuna before turning around and flashing a tongue at Michael. You know, he's supposed to be my companion, he complained to Yuna. You should take care of him better then, she retorted teasingly. Otherwise, I'll snatch him right up. Michael chuckled and shook his head. By the way, Fudge, do you want to join us to meet with the orcs? I'll give you permission to stake around the perimeter like a ninja. Really? Fudge hopped back over to Michael's head as quickly as he left. It was that easy to placate the little slime, now acting as if nothing even happened. Master, don't worry. Those orcs won't see me, but I'll see all of them. I'll protect you. He won't need that, Jaka said, holding the hilt of his sword. I alone am enough. Count me in, Zion shouted. Me too, Amisu muttered under her breath. Lord Michael, we are at your service, Shiina bowed, with a smile forming on her face. Chapter 165, Rivalry in Motion. Meanwhile, deep in the forests, a couple of Orcanine tribe guards stood guarded near the entrance of their village. They were tasked to keep watch around their perimeter and make sure that those Orcupine orcs weren't anywhere near their territory. The two guards were busy having a great time slapping each other around as a sport, when all of a sudden, their noses perked up. There was a scent in the air, a scent they hadn't smelled in quite a long time. It was meat. It had been a few seasons ago since they caught a whiff of any deer or cows in the forest. The earthquakes caused a wide-scale migration from the forest, leading to a decrease in resources for the orcs whose main diet came from red meat. Yet now they were smelling blood in the air. Fresh blood. Fueled by their curiosity and their insatiable hunger for red meat, the two orc guards left their post and followed the scent in the air. It didn't take them long before they finally reached the edge of the forest, where a single slab of red meat was perfectly placed on top of a flat stone altar-like surface, with blood still pooling beside it. As the two orcs moved closer, they saw that a flag had been planted inside the meat, with a single gold letter symbol written on a white canvas. Even though it had been years since they saw this kind of offering, the two orc guards knew exactly what this flag meant. Someone was trying to contact them. They would have never thought that years after the dissolution of the Golden Road, someone would be contacting them again for their services. Even though it was weird, they knew that this was a chance for their tribe to earn resources that could help their tribe tremendously. They took the slab of meat and quickly returned to their tribe, alerting the rest of the Orcanine orcs as the smell of blood and meat emanated in everyone's nose as soon as they entered. "Boo! Two!" They screamed in excitement. It had been so long since they were graced with the presence of meat. And this excitement boiled over to more and more orcs, each one slapping their thighs and chests the same way they worshipped the cacao trees. It didn't take long before the Orcanine chieftain finally took notice of what was happening. He got out of his quarters and approached the two orc guards, who presented him with the meat and the flag planted inside it. "Unfamiliar company," the chieftain muttered to himself. This flag emblem wasn't anything he remembered back in the glory days of the Golden Road. "How long ago did you find this?" the chieftain asked. "Just a few slaps ago, chief," they answered. "You have done a good job," the chieftain said. "Not only did you bring this to my attention as soon as possible, you also prevented our rivals from hearing about such an opportunity." Good, he said. The Orcanines prided themselves in their sense of smells, which came from their half-wolf side. It would have taken the Orcupine tribe the whole day before they found the meat flag. But because of the fast action of his guards, the Orcupine would have no opportunity to learn about this business deal. If they played this right, they could monopolize all the rewards for this mission, giving them enough resources to finally tip the scales in their favor. This was the chance he was waiting for to finally exile those Orcupines. He then turned to his other attendants. "Prepare our very best negotiator to meet with the merchant tomorrow morning. Make sure that you show no sign of this happening to those Orcupines." The rest of the orcs shouted in excitement, agreeing with their chief's orders. The prospect of finally eating meat gave them such a rush that they ended up performing their rituals till nighttime. Boo! Two. The next morning, a group of 4 Orcanine orcs set out to the edges of the forest, towards where they found the meat in the first place. Their excitement was palpable, with their ears perked up and their tails wagging side to side. But as they got closer and closer to the place, a mix of scents assaulted their noses. There were a couple of humans in the mix, with a bunch of other unknown species that they had never met before. But that wasn't what displeased them. It was the fact that they smelled the scent of those extremely familiar to them. As they finally reached the meeting place, their fears were finally confirmed. The Orcupine tribe was also in the meeting place. They, too, sent an envoy of 4 orcs to negotiate with the humans waiting on the other side of the forest. As soon as the 2 orc tribes caught sight of each other, their fury and anger flared up like a volcano, almost resulting in them facing off in another shouting match. But their chieftain's words resounded in their heads and kept them cool. Their hatred for the Orcupine tribe had to wait. Right now, their main objective was to meet with their potential employers and vie for their favor. The 2 orc tribes approached Michael's group while eyeing each other carefully. "We, the Orcanine tribe, meet with the human merchant. We offer you our unstoppable strength," they shouted in pride, looking over at their rival in provocation. "We are the Orcupine tribe, and unlike these meatheads, we will offer you unyielding protection. There is no better defense than us," they retorted back, flaring their quills and spines at their rivals. Meathead, you take that back. You are cowards. Cowards. Why you? The two orc tribes were already in a screaming match, presenting themselves to Michael in an attempt to curry his favor. They must have forgotten that Michael wasn't an orc like them and just tried to impress him by slapping their thighs or strumming their quills. It was a weird sight. Chapter 166. Contact with Orcs. Although it was nice to see that the orcs were already receptive to his attempts to make contact with them, he didn't like the fact that the two orc tribes were so hostile against each other. He could practically cut the tension with a knife. Don't trust these cowards, human. They do nothing but hunker themselves in one place and present their spikes, the Orcanine guards said. These orcs are so stupid that they don't understand the importance of a good defense, the Orcupines retorted back. Meanwhile, the Dragonborns looked at the orcs and couldn't understand their hatred for one another. For them, family was everything. Why don't they just work together? Zion asked innocently. That's just the way of orcs. They're quite passionate, Una said. Michael, who will you choose to hire? I must warn you that choosing one side might anger the other. Both. I can't leave one to fend for themselves, Michael replied. After observing these two orcs with his own eyes, ChatJK3 was able to give him a little bit more information about them. Orcanine orcs. Half-orc, half-canine hybrid. Type, demi-human. Difficulty, element, earth, fire. These orcs, Orcupine orcs. Half-orc, half-porcupine hybrid. Type, demi-human. Difficulty, element, earth, water. What do you think about these orcs? Michael asked ChatJK3. These orcs are extremely good at one thing but bad at another. They would serve as a good addition to the nation if they worked together. It would be an extreme waste if Michael allied with only one tribe. He could see the Orcanines and the Orcupines working together to safeguard Neo-Orcus and subsequently, the Golden Road as well. He needed to find a way to reconcile these two orc tribes or else it would get harder for him to execute his plans. It would be an extremely unpopular destination spot for anyone if there was incessant shouting coming from the forest every single day. Even he wouldn't want to live in Neo-Orcus town if that happened. The best way that he thought of to make these two tribes see eye to eye was to solve the problem they were having in the first place. According to Una, their reason for their civil war was probably a lack of resources. So, the solution was easy. Give them food. Orcs. Listen to me, Michael said, embedding his voice with earth mana similar to the orcs' way of performing their rituals. Except, his way was much more refined, with earth mana condensed into the very air molecules that transmitted the sound. This elicited a strong reaction from the orcs, feeling as if their very soul was shaken by Michael's voice. The orcs immediately shut up and stood straight, looking at Michael with reverence and a little bit of fear in their eyes. It felt like they were in the presence of none other than their chieftains. Michael's booming voice activated a built-in instinct within the orcs, treating Michael as if his words had authority. After all, in their culture, those who could make their voice boom would be able to protect their holy grounds better and therefore connect better with the Earth Goddess herself. That was the whole reason why the two tribes were trying to settle their grudge through a competition of rituals. For a second, the two groups stopped fighting and looked at Michael and did exactly as he said. They listened. We are willing to provide you food and water for as long as your two tribes stop your civil war. It's too noisy, Michael said. You don't have to fight for resources. We can give meat. Michael gave a signal over to Jakku and Zion, who quickly picked up a huge wooden crate and dropped it right in front of the orcs. Just from the scent alone, the orcs knew it was meat. Red meat. The Dragonborns opened the crate, letting the orcs see the goods they could receive every week if they agreed with Michael's proposition. The Orcanines looked at the fresh meat in front of their eyes and almost salivated at the sight. Human. You can call me Michael. Human Michael, the Orcanine guard said. We are willing to do as you say. We are willing to offer you our might in eradicating anyone that offends you. Of course, the Orcupines couldn't stand still and let their rivals take away such a generous patron. Our whole tribe is willing to protect you and your company for life, they promised. Both tribes realized the importance of being in Michael's favor. So, the orcs did what they were familiar with. They competed against each other. The Orcanines immediately made a counteroffer. No, But before the orcs got carried away with their rivalry, Shiina quickly put a stop to it. There's no need for that. Lord Michael has all the protection that he will ever need, she said with a smile. Yet her eyes showed a sharpness to it that sent a chill down the orcs' spines. It was only now that they realized the presence of the Dragonborns. Their appearance was already intimidating as it is, but the orcs felt that their connection to the Earth Goddess was much stronger than theirs. This meant only one thing for the orcs. Don't mess with the human and dragon-like beings accompanying him. I told you there's no need for competition. Your tribes can stop your civil war, or else I'll have to stop it myself, Michael said. The orcs looked apologetic. I'm sorry, human Michael, but our grudge against these orcupines cannot be solved so easily. That is right. We cannot promise that we will have peace, but we will try. Yuna tapped Michael's shoulder and whispered in his ears. They're just regular orcs. They can't do anything. You need to meet with their chieftains to make any significant headway in your peace plan. Michael nodded, agreeing with Yuna's assessment. Tell your chieftains that I want to meet with them. We have business to discuss, he told them. The OCS looked at each other, then back to Michael before meekly nodding their heads. We will relay this to our chieftain, the orcs said before carrying the crate of meat back to their respective villages. But unbeknownst to them, their shadows seemed to lengthen and contract in unnatural ways. Fudge had successfully infiltrated the orcs with his clones. Chapter 167, Orcanine Tribe's Reaction. As the Ocranine orcs returned to their villages, they were immediately welcomed by an applause of thigh-slapping intensity. Even though they hadn't seen what was inside the crate as of yet, their noses told them everything they needed to know. Boo! Was it successful? Their fellow orcs asked expectantly. But instead of seeing joy and excitement, the orcs showed an awkward expression. After bringing back a crate full of meat, everyone thought they had won over the merchant's favor and gained employment. They thought that they had successfully pulled one over the Orcupine tribe. Chieftain! The orcs cried out as they saw their leader come out of his tent. What is it? The chieftain asked after seeing the look on their faces. This was not the look of accomplishment, but strangely it wasn't that of loss either. We met with the human merchant. The orcs began to explain to their chieftain about their meeting with Michael, and how their rival Orcupines somehow caught wind of the meeting and crashed it earlier than them. Let me get this straight. The human will give us meat and water for doing nothing? He is asking for peace? The chieftain asked. Yes, the orc answered. They are probably from Orcus town, the chieftain guessed. It was not hard to guess the reason why the humans were asking for them to stop their civil war. After all, their feud had been affecting the whole forest as of late, especially with the Orcupine chieftain being a lot bolder during his recent rituals. He is asking for nothing else? The chieftain tried to clarify. He is willing to give us precious meat without anything in return? The reason why the chieftain found this hard to believe was because they had scoured every area in the forest and overturned any rock, but they still hadn't found any prey to hunt. He guessed that the humans in Orcus town wouldn't have been able to as well. This meant that food was a very rare resource, especially red meat. Yet somehow, this Michael human had the capacity to share crates of meat with them for free. And it wasn't just them. Michael was also willing to offer the same resource to the Orcupine tribe. Reborn. The chieftain pondered as he looked at the Reborn company symbol painted on the crate. I have never heard of them before. What does he look like? A human boy with gold hair. He had dragons by his side. The orcs reported the 4 dragonborns, with their description being a little bit exaggerated than reality. They seemed to have remembered the dragonborns being a lot scarier than how they actually were. Jakku became a dangerous warrior with his hands always sitting squarely on the hilt of his sword, ready to cut down anything in his path. Shiina was remembered as a scary white dragon who looked like she could kill someone with a single glare. The orcs didn't remember much about Amisu, and only remembered feeling as if they were being watched intensely by a hidden presence. Strangely, they remembered Zion as the energetic brat that he had always been. The rest of the orcs listening in on their conversation gasped as they pictured the dragonborns. They had heard tales of dragons from their ancestors, but never yet met them personally. This made them wary of the human who could tame the dragons to do his bidding. They were connected with the goddess. Most of all was that human. He was able to use the voice, they said, remembering Michael's soul-shaking words. The chieftain eyed the orcs questioningly. The human boy was able to do that? It seemed that the chieftain had been underestimating the human. He thought that Michael was a simple merchant in need of a sword for hire. But from how his orcs described Michael and his attendants, it seemed that he came from a very powerful and influential company with no need for a warrior. And there was only one reason why a company of Reborn's caliber would have any business in Orcus Town. Has the Golden Road been re-established? The chieftain muttered to himself. If this Reborn company had the resources to transport meat to Orcus Town, then it was wholly indicative of their power. Not even the companies he remembered back in the glory days of the Golden Road could navigate through the destroyed forests around Orcus Town. And the only reason why such a company of this magnitude would set its sights on Orcus Town was nothing less than the prospects of the Golden Road. Chief, he wants to meet with you. He is asking for both tribes' cooperation. The orcs relayed Michael's words. There was no reason to reject Michael's proposal. After all, this would solve the starvation problem in their village. Yet, he knew that total peace between the two tribes was nigh impossible to pull off. He had a grudge with the chieftain of the Orcupines, and that could not be solved through words alone. Their grudge had escalated for far too long. But for now, the Orcanine chieftain would be willing to enter a truce with the rival tribe. The Orcupine chieftain would probably agree to this too, as the rewards from Michael's proposal were simply far too alluring. Let us celebrate and have a feast, the chieftain shouted to his village. Our benefactor has given us meat to indulge ourselves with, and indulge we will. Boo! To. Boo! To. Boo! To. In their celebrations, the Orcanine orcs slapped their thighs and gave thanks to the goddess once again, directing their ritual towards their holy grounds. The cacao trees swayed back and forth to the celebrations of the Orcanine tribe as they began to grill and smoke all the meat from the crate. Meanwhile, a sneakily little shadow kept jumping from one orc to the other, spreading its clones throughout the whole Orcanine population. Every time Michael met a new group or species, Fudge always liked to spread his clones to their shadows and survey their every move. After all, it was what a good ninja would do. And as he kept wandering from orc to orc, Fudge suddenly came across their holy grounds, the place filled with 1,000 pristine cacao trees, each one bearing mature fruit. That's chocolate. Miss Yuna and Master will love this. Chapter 168. Fudge is weirdly quiet. Meanwhile, a large number of Rebornians finally arrived in Neo-Orcus with the express intent of helping reconstruct and rejuvenate the new territory of the nation of Reborn. They helped with the construction of houses, the installation of the sewer and plumbing system, as well as turning the whole road system into concrete. Michael also planned on connecting the railroad system and the electric system sometime in the future, but the steam turbine back in the King's region was still an ongoing construction project. But he made sure to include electrical systems and outlets in the houses to prepare for the eventual connection of lines. Things slowed down in Neo-Orcus now that there were actual professional Rebornians on the projects. It also helped that everyone had been more productive with the clear absence of orcs shouting in the distance. This left Michael and the Dragonborns out of something to do in the meantime, so the Dragonborns brought baseball into Neo-Orcus. A satisfying ding echoed into the forest as Zion knocked the ball right out of the park and into the forest. A catfolk demi-human tried to jump and catch the ball flying up towards her, but was unable to coordinate her hands with her eyes, letting the ball pass right through her hands. Jaku, Shiina, and Amisu casually rounded out the bases, giving their brother a high five at home plate. Yeah! Zion screamed. Do you see that, lil bros? The little kids watching on the sidelines cheered and shouted at their idol. The children have taken quite a liking to the youngest Dragonborn because he acted like one himself. That chocolate's mine, Zion declared. "I'm sorry, Sir Zion, but my mistress wants that for herself," Agnes said as she readied herself to bat in the next inning. With the limited supply of cacao in the forests, Michael could only create a few bars of chocolate for everyone to enjoy. And since they had free time anyway, the Dragonborns, mostly Zion, suggested that they played baseball to determine which team would get the chocolates. It was Yuna and her demi-human escorts versus the Dragonborns and the Rebornians. Yuna already knew how to play baseball. Michael even remembered her going on a variety show to play a couple of games. With her and Agnes' talents in physical arts, they were able to quickly pick up the proper skills to go against the Dragonborns. It was as easy as slicing a head, Agnes even said. There were also a couple of Neo-Orcus locals who came to watch, and they too were intrigued with the game of baseball. Unfortunately, Michael wasn't allowed to join in their game. Something about it being too unfair or something, which was kind of true. After all, he didn't even have to hit the ball if he wanted to score a home run. He ended up enjoying the game on the sidelines, which was nice in and of itself. "Fudge, are you there?" Michael talked to the shadow beneath his feet. There was no answer. Usually, the cute little slime would be the first one to compete for a chance to have the last remaining chocolate bars. But he was strangely quiet recently. He wasn't even pestering Yuna for pets or anything. All of this started after they met with the orcs, which Michael found a bit suspicious. Where the hell is that slime? Meanwhile, the Orcanine chieftain visited the holy grounds once again to give his thanks to the goddess. Just as the Reborn company promised, they were given a shipment of red meat and other fresh resources in exchange for the temporary truce between the two tribes. There were still a few instances where the two tribes would encounter each other in the forest, but it would only end in little spats and wouldn't escalate into a full-blown shouting match like before. This led the tribe to become noticeably a lot happier. The lack of competition against the other tribes meant that they could focus on their own family and build more descendants. It would be ideal if this situation continued in the future, which was why their upcoming meeting with the owner of the Reborn company was a very important time for both tribes. The Orcanine chieftain wanted to communicate with the goddess and ask her for her guidance in the meeting. After all, the chieftain believed that it was her who pushed the Reborn company and their tribe to meet with each other, leading to this win-win conclusion for both parties. But unbeknownst to the Orcanine chieftain, there was a mischievous little shadow beneath his feet who was watching everything he was doing. So many cacao trees, so many chocolates, Fudge thought to himself. He had also infiltrated the Orcupine tribe and its chieftain and confirmed that they too were in possession of hundreds of viable cacao trees ready for the picking. Should I tell Master about this? Fudge was just about to return to Michael's side, when he suddenly had an idea. What if I help Master? What if I'm the one who helps Master get all the cacao seeds he needs to make mountains of chocolate? Maybe he'll give me a lot. A vision of him swimming in a sea of chocolate bars flashed in Fudge's mind, eating all the chocolate that could fit in his mouth and getting tons of compliments from his masters. "I'll give you thousands of pets," Yuna would say. "You're the best ninja," his master would say. With this idea in mind, the mischievous ninja slime moved out of the shadows and inhabited one of the trees in front of the chieftain. Hiss! The chieftain was startled as he suddenly felt the presence of something unknown in their sacred lands. "Who's there?" he asked carefully. Out of the corner of his eyes, he suddenly saw something slithering across a branch. It was something thin and scaly. He turned his head and saw a single snake, with red eyes and green scales like that of a dragon, staring back at him. There was only one conclusion the chieftain could come to. "An envoy from the goddess?" he proclaimed. Chapter 169. Snake Tempter. The chieftain's ancestors believed that their sacred grounds were sacred for a reason. It was a place that only the goddess could touch, and they, as its protectors, were the only ones granted access to this place. The fact that no one had ever seen a single animal inside their sacred grounds in the entire history of the Orcanine tribe was proof of that. No bird made its nest in the cacao trees and no squirrels burrowed in the trees. The only living beings in this forest were those who were a part of the life cycle of the cacao trees themselves. There weren't supposed to be any snakes in this area. The goddess wouldn't permit it. Therefore, the chieftain could only conclude that this was not a normal snake. Its intelligent red eyes showed consciousness unlike that of a wild animal. The fact that this snake appeared in perfect timing, just as he was about to ask the goddess for her input and guidance, made him think that this was made by divine intervention. It all made sense for the chieftain. He was beginning to think that the Reborn Company was an envoy from the Earth Goddess herself, treating the meat and resources they gave as literal heaven sent. Therefore, the only conclusion he could come to was that this snake was an agent from heaven itself. "I bow in the presence of the divine," the chieftain said as he kneeled towards the green snake. Meanwhile, Fudge was relishing the fact that his illusion had gone so smoothly that he didn't even need any effort to convince the orc of anything. Yeah. Bow hee. Fudge said smugly, with his snake tongue hissing in happiness. "The goddess must have sensed my worries and sent you to alleviate my concerns. Am I right?" the chieftain asked expectantly. "Humu, that is right. Tell this good snake, about your problems." The Orcanine chieftain breathed a sigh of relief and began to spill his thoughts on the upcoming meeting with the human owner of the Reborn Company. After all, it was more than probable that the chieftain of the Orcupine tribe would also be present in the meeting, seeing as the Reborn Company also made an agreement with them. "I am simply worried that my grudge against my old rival will prevail against my better judgment. I want to preserve our good graces with the humans, but I am afraid that I will want to bring up old grudges once I meet with my enemy face to face." The rivalry between the two chieftains was personal and ran deep in their history. Humu, Fudge muttered, nodding his snake head. "I think that competition and rivalry are healthy and needed." The chieftain looked up at the snake. "Is that so?" "Yes, absolutely. You need to compete against the Orcupine tribe to see which one of you is the best at showing your love for the Reborn Company." "Channeling my hate for my rival into gifts?" the chieftain muttered, his eyes flickering as he thought of many scenarios. "In your meeting with the awesome leader of the Reborn Company and the good ninja by his side, you should try your best to be friends with them. That way, you can be sure that your tribe will be blessed rather than your rivals." The chieftain's eyes widened as if he had just realized something. "You're right. If the Earth Goddess had planned for our tribe and the Reborn Company to meet, then it must mean that whoever gains their support will also be blessed by the goddess." But he remembered that their tribe had nothing to offer. "We have no gifts to give except our service," the chieftain said. Fudge's eyes glimmered. "Well, you do have something. This." The snake slithered up towards one of the trees and wrapped its tail towards one of the mature cacao fruits hanging on the branch. "You can give them chocolate beans." "Chocolate? Cacao beans." Fudge quickly corrected himself. A doubtful look passed on the chieftain's face. "I do not think humans would appreciate cacao beans. They serve no effect for them other than bitterness." "Don't worry about that," Fudge assured. "Just make sure to stock a lot of cacao beans and present them as a gift." The Orcanine chieftain, though a little bit skeptical, was willing to try it out. After all, they had quite an abundance of cacao beans that would only spoil in their warehouses if not used. "All right, we shall prove to the goddess that only we deserve her blessings. I thank you for giving me this advantage," the chieftain said, determined to beat the Orcupine tribe using the gift method. Of course. Unknown to the Orcanine chieftain, his very rival was also being visited by a stranger who presented himself as a snake envoy from the Earth Goddess. "Cacao beans, you say? Then I shall do as you guide me. If it will help me best my rival, then I will give the Reborn Company as much cacao beans as we can give," the Orcupine chieftain said, flaring his quills in excitement. Both chieftains instructed their attendants to harvest as many beans from their sacred ground in preparation. They smiled, thinking that they were the only ones given knowledge from the envoy of the goddess. They didn't know they were getting playing right in the hands of the mischievous slime, who was already imagining himself eating hundreds of chocolate bars by himself, with the Dragonborns looking on enviously at him. Fudge popped up right in front of Michael's shadow and acted like nothing happened. "Where did you go?" Michael asked. It had been a few days since the usually talkative slime disappeared. Master, I want 100 chocolate bars." "Okay," Fudge said, giggling and unable to hide his excitement. "What are you talking about?" Just then, Michael heard a knock on his door. Shiina entered the room and bowed towards Michael. "The orcs have arrived, sir. And they seem to be carrying something with them." Chapter 170. Orcs' Gifts to Michael. Michael walked out of his house and saw the locals of Neo-Orcus carefully watching the entrance gates as a group of 5 Orcanine orcs waited on the edge of the forest. This would be the first time they would set their sights on the orcs that had been giving them tinnitus for quite a while. The adults regarded them with a little bit more reservation and caution, while the kids excitedly peeked around the walls to see new demi-humans. If it weren't for the Rebornians and the Dragonborns by their side, the locals would be a lot more intimidated by them. "What's going on?" Michael asked the Dragonborns. Zion peeked above the walls like the other children. "I was teaching my juniors how to play baseball when I sensed them approaching. Bro Mike. Why a Dublin?" "I sensed them too," Jaka said, stretching his arms lazily. "I smell chocolate," Omisu muttered under her breath. Michael looked at the orcs with his supreme skill, observing the very mana in their bodies. "None of them is the leader," he commented. There was no standout orc that he would expect to be their leader. Yuna walked beside Michael and nodded her head. Orc chieftains have a much more defined muscle structure and a decorated mane around their necks. They must be here for some other reason. Michael thought they were here to finally set the meeting for the orc chieftains, but judging by the absence of the other tribe, it looked like they had another agenda for this visit. He walked forward, with the orcs standing at attention upon seeing him approach. Once he was closer, the OCS recognized his youthful face and golden hair. Most of all, just like the other orcs said, the human owner of Reborn had an intense appeal of mana, as every piece of the element on Earth was sucked towards his body like a magnet. They began slapping their thighs and chests in synchronicity to display their respect for Michael. "Boo! We, the Orcanine tribe, present these gifts to the Reborn company as a token of our gratitude." The orcs put down the large sacks onto the ground, and each one was almost twice as big as their bodies. It landed on the ground with a thud, making everyone quite curious as to what the orcs considered a gift. Michael, with his enhanced senses and his affinity to all elements, could sense the earth mana emanating from those sacks. Their smell was something familiar too. "Is that?" "Yes. Those are large amounts of cacao beans," ChatJK3 confirmed. The orcs ripped open one of the sacks and showed him the thousands upon thousands of white cacao beans inside ready for the taking. "You're giving me these?" Michael asked. The orcs slapped their thighs with a resounding, "Yes, human. Our chieftain is showing his goodwill for you and your Reborn company for all the meat and resources that you gave us." Michael picked one of the beans and inspected it, verifying that it was indeed cacao beans that he was familiar with. "How did you get so many?" he asked them curiously. Even when he scoured the forests for any remaining beans, he only saw a few handfuls at a time. Yet, these orcs were able to hand out about 100 kilos in just one sack alone. Cacao beans had an expiration date, which meant that these couldn't have been in their storage for long. "That's from their sacred grounds, master." Fudge suddenly popped up out of Michael's shadow and excitedly explained. "Sacred grounds? How did you know that?" Michael questioned, eyeing the ninja slime suspiciously. "Oh, hee," was the only response Fudge could make before he immediately returned to Michael's shadow. The orcs slapped their thighs once again, showing Michael his due respect. "We will be back to deliver more in the future. Our chieftain wants you to think of it as nothing more than a gift, and hopes that you will think kindly of our tribe." "Boo! To. Michael half-heartedly copied their actions and slapped his thighs. "Boo to." His attempt at honoring their rituals and their customs put a big smile on the orcs' faces before they retreated back into the forest. With the orcs gone, the Dragonborns and the kids crowded over the sacks of cacao beans with excitement written all over their faces. "Sir Michael, does this mean you can make more chocolate?" "Yes. This whole sack is mine, right bro Mike?" Zion said, already taking a sack for himself. "Try it out. See what will happen," Shiina warned. her eyes already making Zion feel like he was being pierced by 1,000 needles. That belongs to Lord Michael. He decides who he gives it to, preferably someone who works hard. Like me. The rest of them began to clamor for Michael to make more chocolate, which he was planning on doing since they got so many cacao beans this time. However, before he did that, Michael looked over at his shadow with a serious eye. Fudge? Sacred grounds? How did you know that? His shadow remained silent. Before Michael could ask for more, he suddenly felt another presence approaching them from the other side of the forest. About a minute later, the sounds of heavy footsteps entered everyone's ears. It was the orcs, again. But this time they were of a different kind. Instead of their thick mane, these orcs had spines and quills spread all over their body. It was the Orcupine tribe. Ra, ta, h, they said, thrumming their quills to create a rattling sound. We, the Oripin tribe, present these gifts to the Reborn company as a token of our gratitude. Their words were all too familiar. And just like the Orcanine tribe, these orcs were dragging large and heavy sacks of what Michael could only describe as extremely similar to what the Orcanine tribe had. It was easy to guess what they had brought with them as a gift. They plopped down it in front of Michael and performed their ritual of thanks. We hope that you enjoy the fruits of our sacred grounds. We will be giving you more in the future. So our chieftain hopes that you look at our village in a good light.